The smell of ash and burnt wood still lingers in the air of Seabrook Harbor, a scent that will probably haunt me forever. They say that when tragedy strikes, family is your final refuge. They say blood is thicker than water. They lied. The fire started at the restaurant district and devoured the entire historic block within hours. It took my bakery. It took the recipe book my grandmother left me. It took all my savings and the dream I had spent 5 years building with these two hands. And as I stand here amidst the rubble of my life, with burned hands and a future murkier than the smoke around me, my family is at home, not to comfort me. They're packing their best suitcases. They're preparing for a flight to Los Angeles, a place of golden sunshine and glamorous dreams. My younger brother Leo, the star of the family, is about to launch a new lifestyle brand, and my parents say they can't miss this golden opportunity. They call it an investment in the future. I will never forget the last thing my father said to me before their taxi rolled away, leaving me alone with the smell of ash. He didn't even look me in the eye. He said, "Don't call us with your problems, Clara. Leo needs absolute focus to succeed." Absolute focus. While my world had just completely collapsed, they chose a frivolous social media dream over their daughter in crisis. They left me behind with declined calls from the insurance company, a depleted bank account, and a pain that was more than skin deep. But this isn't a story about a fire that went out. This is a story about another fire, one that was kindled in the most unexpected of places, by people I never thought would care. This is the story of how a community decided they would not let one of their own fall. Before I tell you about the knock on the door that changed everything, let's pause for a moment and you can tell me in the comments. Have you ever felt that your real achievements, the things you poured your sweat and tears into building, were downplayed in favor of someone else's flashy potential? If your answer is yes, if you understand the feeling of having your efforts made invisible, hit that subscribe button and join our community, because the story you're about to see will prove one thing. The strongest foundations aren't built with blood relations, but with the respect and kindness of those who truly see your worth. Now, let's see how a miracle sprouted from the ashes. But before that knock on the door, before the miracle was kindled by strangers, there was only the cold, harsh truth. To understand why their departure was like a knife straight through my heart, you have to understand what the salty donut truly was. It wasn't just a bakery. It was the beating heart of the main street in Seabrook Harbor. It was where the fishermen stopped at 5 a.m. for hot coffee and fresh-baked croissants before heading out to sea. It was where young couples had their first dates over frosted cupcakes. It was where the town's children pressed their noses against the glass, dreaming of the rainbow-sprinkled donut. I knew the names of every regular, knew Mr. Miller always took his coffee black with no sugar, knew little Sarah had a nut allergy. My hands always smelled of flour and cinnamon, and the tinkling of the bell when a customer came in was the soundtrack to my life. I was a builder. I built joy for people from the simplest things: flour, sugar, and a whole lot of heart. Meanwhile, my younger brother, Leo, was a dreamer. My parents never called him a dreamer. They called it having vision and creative potential. When I was saving every penny to open the bakery, my parents refused to co-sign my first business loan, saying it was too risky. But just a year later, they happily spent nearly $10,000 on state-of-the-art podcasting equipment for Leo, because he said he was going to be the next Joe Rogan. That podcast lasted for 6 episodes. After that came a dropshipping business, then a course on cryptocurrency. Every one of Leo's projects was generously funded and ended in silence, but my parents' faith in his genius never wavered. That difference was most apparent during anniversaries. I vividly remember the 1-year anniversary of the bakery. I worked all week to prepare a small party for the community, personally making a giant celebration cake. My parents called at the last minute to say they couldn't make it. The reason? They had to fly to Austin to attend a fan meetup. Leo was hosting for his gaming channel. That meetup, I later learned, had exactly 15 people in attendance. That night, I stood alone in my brightly lit bakery, watching everyone happily enjoy the cake I'd made, and I felt more alone than ever. And then the fire came. It didn't start at my place. It originated in the seafood restaurant at the end of the street, an electrical short in the kitchen in the middle of the night. But the vicious coastal wind turned a small spark into a ferocious monster. I was woken by the sound of wailing sirens and flashing red lights against my bedroom window. I rushed outside and froze. The entire historic district, the soul of Seabrook Harbor, was engulfed in a sea of flames. In that moment of panic, as everyone was running away, my mind was focused on only one thing. Not the equipment, not the money in the safe. It was the old recipe book, its leather cover worn, my grandmother's handwriting faded by the years. It was priceless, the only legacy I truly cared about. Ignoring the shouts of the firefighters, I ran into the alley behind the bakery. The heat was immense. The thick black smoke made me choke and gag. I used a chair to smash my office window, climbed inside, and snatched the book from my desk. Just then, I heard a horrifying crack above me. A burning wooden beam was falling. I only had time to throw my arms up to shield my head. A searing, piercing pain shot through my arm as I scrambled back out, just before the entire roof collapsed. I sat down hard on the pavement, clutching the book to my chest, gasping for air, tears mixing with the ash on my face. A firefighter ran over, wrapped a blanket around me, and called for the paramedics. That's when I saw my parents and Leo running toward me. But their eyes weren't filled entirely with worry for me. In them, I saw horror at the sight of their investment, in Leo's trip being threatened. And that's when I was being led to the temporary shelter, my arm bandaged, overhearing them discuss their non-refundable plane tickets to Los Angeles. My life had turned to ash, and they were worried about missing their flight to the limelight. They left on a Tuesday morning. The sky was mockingly clear. There was no lingering hug, only empty promises to call later, and advice for me to be strong. The taxi took them to the airport, carrying with it all the last remaining warmth in my world, leaving me alone in the temporary motel room the Red Cross had arranged. The room smelled of disinfectant and despair. The following days passed in a hazy nightmare. The pain from the burns on my hands and arms was a constant, throbbing reminder. The simplest tasks became monumental challenges. Opening a bottle of water made me wince in pain. Changing my clothes took nearly half an hour. I lived on crackers and instant food because preparing a proper meal was impossible. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the hell of bureaucracy. I spent hours each day on the phone with the insurance company. The soulless voice on the other end repeated terms I didn't understand. Exclusion clauses. Under investigation. Needs a field adjuster. They told me that because the fire originated elsewhere, determining liability would be complicated and could take months, even years. With every call that ended, I felt another piece of hope inside me get extinguished. My savings were dwindling, and the future was an insurmountable wall I had no way of climbing. Isolation was the worst enemy. The walls of the motel room seemed to shrink a little more each day. The silence was deafening, broken only occasionally by the sound of the TV in the next room. In a moment of weakness, I opened Instagram, and I saw it. A picture of Leo, standing in front of the Hollywood sign, a dazzling smile on his face, wearing the expensive sunglasses my parents had just bought him. The caption read, "Chasing the dream. LA, be good to me." I threw the phone onto the bed. My breathing grew heavy. I didn't cry. I think I was all out of tears. I just sat there in the darkness of the room, feeling an absolute emptiness. They were chasing their dream while mine had burned to ash. That truth, stark and cruel, made me feel so small, so meaningless. That was when I hit rock bottom. I hadn't eaten all day. I hadn't answered texts from the few friends who had checked in. I just sat motionless, watching the shadows lengthen across the wall as the sun went down. I wondered if there was any point in trying anymore. I had lost everything, and there was no one there to care. The thought of giving up was no longer scary. It seemed like a release. And then, in the silence of my despair, there was a knock on the door. Knock, knock, knock. Firm, decisive, not the knock of someone who was unsure. I flinched. I thought about ignoring it. Maybe it was the wrong room. But the knock came again, louder this time. Reluctantly, I dragged myself to the door and looked through the peephole. Standing outside was Mr. Henderson, the owner of Henderson's Hardware, from down the street. He was in his 60s, his face weathered with the lines of time, always in the same old flannel shirt. He was a man of few words, a bit gruff. I had only spoken to him a few times when buying screws or paint for the bakery. Why was he here? I hesitated, then opened the door. Mr. Henderson looked at me, then looked past me into the messy room, his sharp gaze taking in every detail. He didn't offer any of the empty platitudes like, "I'm so sorry for what happened," or "It's all going to be okay." Instead, he held out one hand. In the other, he carried an old toolbox and a large thermos. "Coffee," he said, his voice raspy. "Black, no sugar, just how you like it." I was stunned. He remembered how I took my coffee. I didn't know what to say, just stood there. Mr. Henderson let out a sigh, as if my silence was trying his patience. He stepped past me, walked straight into the room, and set the toolbox and the thermos on the only table. "All right, girl," he said, turning back to face me, his eyes stern. But for the first time, I saw a genuine concern in them. "I've talked to some other folks in town. We're not going to let that fire kill this place." He unscrewed the lid of the thermos, and the rich smell of strong coffee filled the room, overpowering the scent of despair. He poured a cup and handed it to me. "Now then," he said, clapping his hands together. "We've got work to do. Where do we start?" I looked down at the hot cup of coffee in my hands, then at the gruff man with the kind heart standing before me. For the first time in days, I felt something other than pain. It was a flicker of hope, small but warm, glowing amidst the ashes in my heart. "Where do we start?" Mr. Henderson's question hung in the air. I looked around the desolate motel room, and my eyes landed on a messy pile of papers on the table. Denial letters from the insurance company, debt notices, damage cost estimates. I just pointed at it silently. Mr. Henderson gave a firm nod. "Right," he said. "We start with that paper dragon first." And that's how my fight began again. But this time I was not alone. Mr. Henderson didn't just bring coffee. He brought a plan. With the experience of a man who had run a business in Seabrook Harbor for over 40 years, he knew exactly who to call, what forms to fill out. He sat with me for hours, translating complex insurance terms, helping me draft response letters. His presence, steady and resolute, was like a lighthouse in my storm. But he wasn't the only one. His action was like a pebble tossed into a still pond, creating ripples that spread throughout the town. 2 days later, Maria, the owner of the Daily Grind coffee shop and my business competitor, showed up at the door with 2 containers of hot food. "You need to eat," she said simply, without any pretense. "This whole town needs its donuts back." On the counter at her shop, a glass jar appeared with a sign, "Fundraiser to rebuild the salty donut." Then came the Thompson brothers, the town's 2 burly carpenters. They came, surveyed the wreckage, and said they would help me rebuild the frame and the counter without charging a dime for labor. A young barista named Sadie, who was great with social media, started a GoFundMe page for me on her own. She wrote a touching story about the bakery and its role in the town. I cried when I read what she wrote. And then, the real miracle happened that Saturday morning. Mr. Henderson had called for a community cleanup day. I thought only a few people would show up. But when I was driven to the historic district, I couldn't believe my eyes. More than 50 townspeople were there, with shovels, gloves, and wheelbarrows. There were even tourists who had once visited my bakery and heard the news online. They worked together under the South Carolina sun, clearing away every broken brick, every charred piece of wood, amidst laughter and mutual encouragement. I sat on a folding chair, my hands still bandaged, pointing out where they needed to clear first. Tears streamed down my cheeks, but this time, they were tears of immeasurable gratitude. The following months were a period of rebirth. The money raised from all over, combined with the help in labor and materials from the community, allowed me to start rebuilding. It wasn't just rebuilding a bakery, it was rebuilding a faith in human kindness. 6 months later, the salty donut reopened. It wasn't the same as before. It was even more beautiful. The brick wall behind the counter kept its scorch marks as a reminder, but on it hung a large wooden plaque engraved with the words, "Rebuilt by the heart of Seabrook Harbor." There was a community corner with photos from the cleanup day. It quickly became busier than ever, a living symbol of the town's resilience. In the midst of it all, I received a text from Leo. Not a word of concern, not a word of apology, My brother complained that his channel wasn't getting many views and asked if I had any spare capital to invest in him. I read the message, a sad smile on my lips. I deleted it without replying. I no longer needed their recognition or concern. My world was different now. And tonight, as the last customers have gone home, I stand alone in my new bakery. The fragrant smell of baked goods and coffee has replaced the old smell of ash. I look at the community board, at the smiling faces in the photos, and I have finally understood something. People often say, blood is thicker than water. But I have learned that the mortar mixed from the kindness of strangers can sometimes build a foundation stronger than any bloodline. A true legacy isn't the name you are born with, but the community you choose to belong to and build up together. And that is the final practical lesson I want to leave you with. Never underestimate the value of what you are building every day, no matter how small or unglamorous it may seem. And most importantly, invest in your community. A hello to a neighbor, a purchase at a local shop, an act of help with no expectation of return. Those are the most valuable and reliable insurance policies when the storms of life hit. The strongest foundation isn't a bank account, but the people who are willing to offer you a hand when you fall. If you believe in the power of community and the kindness of those around you, please share this story. Thank you for listening to my journey from the ashes to a new beginning.